joined your community, and I'm really excited to be here with you all, see such a great turnout. And you know, Rock Island's 175th anniversary. That's an exciting time, and so I want to sort of bring us back to what else was happening in 1841. I'm sure, too, you can tell me a lot of things about Rock Island that I don't know. So I look forward to talking to you, too, after this. And, again, joining the community, coming to more events here. This looks like a lovely place to come and talk and explore and learn. So, of course, Harrison, he was our nation's 9th president. And he was between Van Buren, and then his vice president had to take over, and that was Tyler. But first off, just to get some interaction here, what do you know about William Henry Harrison?
Tippy Canoe.
Tippy Canoe, yes, yes. And Tyler too, yes.
Caught pneumonia and died a month after he was in
Yes. Anything else? Oh, yes, yes. So, when I talk to people and just mention it first, this is generally what they say. So, you were right on. But I want to talk a little bit more about who he was today. I want to talk about his inaugural, his long inaugural, and put that in the context of the campaign he was running in 1840, and also look into a bit more about what inaugurals are in terms of political communication, how they form a unique, perhaps, form of rhetoric, and it's a speech that has been given every time a new president takes the podium, right, or is reelected. So every 4 years in our nation's history, this has gone on. And it's a tradition that continues. And there are certain elements that are carried through. But each new personality, each new president brings a little something. And we're going to explore the something that Harrison brings. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what Obama brought and how that compares and contrasts to Harrison. And then we're going to look ahead and say, what can we expect in 2017? And that's a hard question to answer. So, first of all, William Henry Harrison, born in 1773. His father was a very famous political figure. His father actually signed the Declaration of Independence. And so Benjamin Harrison was well known in the political circles, which also meant that the Harrison family was well respected, well known. William Henry was very well educated. He knew some Latin, he knew some French. They were a pretty wealthy family, and this becomes ironic when I tell you a little bit about the campaign messaging that William Henry Harrison ran when he was running for president. He became the governor of the Northwest Territory, so around these parts right here. He was appointed by Thomas Jefferson, and so what he was really in charge of is negotiating with the Native Americans and forming treaties with them, and also ending treaties with them. He is very well known, as you said, for the Battle of Tippecanoe. This was fought on November 7th, 1811. And what happened during this time is basically there was a battle, and many Native Americans were killed. And what happened is, instead of actually, logistically doing anything in terms of the War of 1812, it actually drove a lot of Native Americans to fight with the British. So in terms of it being a war that, or a battle that actually helped the United States logistically, it did not actually do that. But nevertheless, William Henry Harrison became a war hero of sorts for this battle, which is ironic when you think about it in many different ways. And so he was looked at as this person, right? Tippecanoe. Tippecanoe, he's the man that can get things done for us in a military sense and also just in a general sense in terms of governing. He took this reputation and he served in both the House and the Senate. And in 1936, he was one of 3 people the newly formed Whig Party put up for president. And they ran 3 people during that presidential election, which is very interesting. and none of them won. All right, Van Buren won the presidency in that year. And, yep.
Don't you mean 18?
Oh, I'm sorry, do I keep saying 19?
It's 19.
Oh, I do, I'm sorry, good point. So in 1836, he lost the presidency, and then in 1840, he ran again. This time there was one Whig nominee. His vice presidential candidate was Tyler, and they won the presidency that year. For the 1840 presidential election, Harrison versus Van Buren, the election was very much a referendum on Van Roon. People called him, not Van Buren, Van Roon. And Van Buren, was the Democratic Republican nominee who was the sitting president. He was the incumbent. And the Harrison team started what a lot of people say is the modern campaign here. And what that meant is they went negative. We know a little bit about that right now, I think. But so they went negative, and they really looked at Van Buren and said, you know what? Van Buren has not done what we expect a president to do. And that was on a number of reasons. So the first was in 1837, there was an economic depression. So what had happened as the United States was acquiring land, there was a real estate bubble, sort of like the one we experienced, in 2008, that a lot of land was being acquired, but it was too expensive for a lot of people to buy, and it created this bubble. And what happened is that there was a recession. And a lot of people said that Van Buren did not do a good job of alleviating the financial strain. And the other thing that he tried to do that people did not, and he was successful in doing it, that people were not in favor of, was Van Buren pushed for this independent treasury that was separate from the state banks. And the Whigs, the party of Harrison, tried to frame this as taking away state power and actually sort of abandoning the states. So Harrison tried to portray him as somebody that was taking too much executive power away from the states and too much executive power away from the people too. So that was another element in this campaign. We had Andrew Jackson, the president of the people, and then Van Buren, who really continued in that tradition. But people started to say, you're actually becoming too much of a power. The president at this time, as I'm sure you know, there was hesitancy in giving the president too much power. They didn't want the president to become like a monarch, like England. So there was hesitation against that, and that's what Harrison tried to run against, right? Harrison was, I'm going to restore this great country to the people. And so there was also a contrasting image depiction. So this is where you see the going negative. So remember how Harrison was pretty wealthy. He grew up. He was very educated. Well, Harrison tried to turn the tables. And so while he was portraying Van Buren, he said, you know what, Van Buren, I'm going to portray you, and this was on all the slogans, like, a rich, aristocratic person. You are rich, you have money, you don't understand the common people, you drink champagne. And this was posited in contrast to Harrison, who was born in a log cabin and drank cider and was one of the people. And they also tried to convey Van Buren as sort of weak and feeble, in contrast to this giant war hero of Harrison. And so a lot of the things that they did revolved around different messages, and a lot of these messages during the campaign were put forth in songs. And so I want to play you one of those bits so you can kind of see how they're depicting Harrison in one way, and Tyler, his vice presidential candidate, and then Van Buren, little Van, you'll see, in a different way.
Oh, who has heard the great commotion, motion, motion all the country through? It is the ball rolling on for Tippecanoe and Tyler too, for Tippecanoe and Tyler too. And with them will be little Van, Van is a used up van. And with them will be little Van. Sure, let him talk about hard cider, cider, and Loch Havens too. Will only help to speed the ball for Tippecanoe and Tyler too, for Tippecanoe and Tyler too. And with them will be little Van, Van is a used up van. And with them will be little Van. Like the rush of mighty waters, onward it will go. And its course will bring it through for Tippecanoe and Tyler too, for Tippecanoe and Tyler too. And with them will be little Van, Van is a used up van. And with them will be little Van.
So as you see there, we have little Van, right? And then the great Harrison, the great hero of Tippecanoe. So there was definitely a contrasting image depiction that they promoted. And so the electoral outcome of the election was that Harrison, 234 electoral votes, and Van Buren 60. So Harrison and the Whigs performed quite well. So ultimately, Harrison defeated Van Buren, and then came his inauguration day, a day of celebration where hopefully the country would be called together to unify again after a divisive election. Inaugural day was damp, it was cold, but that didn't stop Harrison. He went up to the podium, and he didn't wear a coat, he didn't wear a hat, and he took to the stage to deliver his first major address as president. And he delivered it, and delivered it, and delivered it, and delivered it. Ultimately, it took about 2 hours, which is the longest on record. It was 8,443 words. And if you can see from the chart here, that's almost 2 times longer than the next longest inaugural, and typically about 4 times longer than the general modern inaugural address. All right, so you can, I think this visual depiction catches it very well. You go, whoop, there's Harrison, and then you go around. So in any case, the long length of this inaugural has preserved Harrison's public memory as a president about as much as his short presidency, and a lot of people say the two, right, go hand in hand. Because less than a month later, on April 4th, he died of what many say is pneumonia from that day of getting wet. Some now say, actually, and I won't go into the science of this, that it might have been typhoid. That's another thing going on. So this is one of those things where it may be more legend, right? I think we were talking about that more than actually scientific diagnosis. But Harrison's inaugural was also considered one of the worst ever, maybe the worst. And we'll talk about maybe why that was. Maybe it was just because it was so long. People did not want to keep tuning in. But I want to ask you, because I have researched to see what people have thought has been the best inaugural. Do you have any guesses?
Second, Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln's have been said to be very, very popular, very good. They're actually very studied in my field, right? The number of articles that have been written about those speeches far exceeds the other presidents' inaugurals. Yes. Other thoughts?
John F. Kennedy.
Yes, right? We can remember his lines, right? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Yeah. Other thoughts? Ronald Reagan's first inaugural was considered very popular, and also all of FDR's were, and George Washington's first. George Washington's second inaugural was thought to be also one of the worst, and it was very short, And I think perhaps people were looking for more of, right, a presidential announcement at that time, more talk from him, more leadership. But again, remember, this was at a time that the president wanted to limit, in some ways, both their political power and their rhetorical power, just so they didn't set a dangerous precedent, which is in fact the precedent that maybe wasn't followed, that Harrison was calling to people to come back to, that the executive power should be limited. So this is where we get into a little bit of the rhetoric, where my studies come in. So as we look into the content of his inaugural, we can notice some similarities and differences to other inaugural addresses, and they belong into a category of rhetorical speech that you call the epideictic. And an epideictic speech is supposed to create community. It's supposed to focus the people in the present. It's supposed to be a celebration. So maybe, a birthday speech or a wedding speech. Those are the types of speeches that we say are in the epideictic occasion. So it's less about dwelling on the past or projecting to the future. It's less about policy or punishment. It's about bringing people together under a celebration of certain values. So this is why inaugural, one of the purposes is to bring people together after a hard-fought, divisive election. In some ways, as we explore Harrison's speech, and as I'll share with you, it seems more like a lecture and a rant at times, and you'll see what I mean when I get there, but it does fall into and have these elements that are typical of a more general element of inaugural addresses. So Kathleen Hall Jamieson and Carlin Kors Campbell wrote a book, and it's called Deeds Done in Words, Presidents Creating the Presidency. And in one of their chapters, they looked at all of the inaugural addresses in our history. And they looked at what are the common elements here. And what are the presidents trying to do? And they came up with 4 of them. And the first element is that it should unify the people, right? And also that it should unify the people so that it brings them together to witness the presidential oath-taking. So they become part of that oath-taking. The second is that it rehearses communal values that the nation shares. And oftentimes these are past communal traditions, past communal values such as freedom, liberty. You're probably going to see that in almost every inaugural that you listen to. The Constitution is often celebrated. Third, it sets forth the political principles that will guide that new administration. So if there are certain things that administration hopes to accomplish or things they hope to change, that might be brought forward. If they are going to really emphasize a change in the direction of the country or a change in the economy, they will hint at it. Now they won't go into the specifics because policy specifics are generally preserved for the State of the Union address, which they generally give about a month later. All right, and fourth, the final element that Campbell and Jamieson put forth is that the president needs to show that he, and maybe she, has to understand the importance of executive power. They understand they have certain responsibilities, but they also understand they have limits to what they can do because of, if you look back to that other element, that communal value of separation of powers we have in our nation's history. So each president fulfills these elements in different ways. Some give more value to maybe the first and second. Some privilege the fourth. Harrison fulfills all of these components, but he does fulfill the third and fourth, puts more emphasis on those elements than the first two. But I want to bring you through each one so we can get a feel for how he's fulfilling each of those components. So to constitute the moment and the audience as important, he addresses them first as fellow citizens. So addressing them as fellow citizens rather than I, your president, you who must listen to me, right? He creates this community of unity saying, hey, we're on the same page, we're on the same team here. All right, then he brings the people together and says, right, we all have a role here, and Harrison very much does it and says we all have a role under God, right? That each person is equal to one another, we are all equal under God, and he pulls them together. Finally, he says this, which is up here, you will bear with you to your homes the remembrance of the pledge I have this day given to discharge all the high duties of my exalted station according to the best of my ability. And I shall enter upon their performance with entire confidence in the support of a just and generous people. So here he's really saying, thank you. You have been a part of my oath-taking. You have witnessed this. I have given the pledge, but essentially you have given me permission to take that pledge. And you share it with me as you leave and go to your home. So remember that. We are together. We are unified. So the second element is the communal values. And Harrison certainly puts forth these shared communal values. He puts forth the importance of liberty, of patriotism, right? And that these are the things that our country stands upon. He also highlights that, quote, profound reference to the Christian religion and a thorough conviction that sound morals, religious liberty, and a just sense of religious responsibility are essential and connected with all true and lasting happiness. So there he really pulls out this idea that we are a moral people. That should be important to us. We must carry that through. That we are a Christian nation. And that's one thing that may not be as emphasized in modern inaugurals, right? There are more religions than Christianity in the country, and that is starting to be recognized more. But you can see here that there are certain ideas that are common to most people in the nation, that liberty especially. For the third element of guiding principles, Harrison spends the majority of that long address on this element. And that is not completely typical for an inaugural address. But he spends a lot of time laying out what some say is the Whig platform. So this is the first Whig president. So Harrison might have seen this as his time. I can get these ideas on the agenda. Many of his statements point blame at Van Buren and in some ways Jackson without explicitly stating their names, but he really puts in a lot of emphasis in saying we need to limit executive power. We need to restore the importance of the separation of powers. He says we must keep, quote, respective departments of government as well as all the other authorities in our government within their appropriate orbits. So this really points for this idea that we need to make sure that our branches of government all get their power. And here he's especially concerned with Congress not having as much power as it should. He really believes that Congress has been taken, their power has been taken away, and that more power needs to be given to the legislature. We can't just have, he often talks about a monarch or Caesar. That is not what the U.S. is about. So another thing that you'll see is that he actually in his speech says the executive should not serve more than one term. He says, I pledge to you, I will not serve more than one term. And remember at this time there weren't term limits, right, on the president. So he's basically saying, you know what, enough is enough, I will show you through my actions and my pledge here that the executive has too much power, which is why I will only be your executive for one term. Well, he didn't make it for even that, right? So, another thing that he emphasized in terms of guiding principles was that the territories and states must have a common co-partnership. Now remember, at this time, we're growing as a nation. We're trying to figure out how we're going to make sense of this relationship that's changing and moving and doing different things. And so he says, of all the great interests which appertain to our country, that of union, cordial, confiding, fraternal union is by far the most important. So he's saying to everyone, we need to get along. We need to respect each other, okay? And this is also emphasizing those communal values, right? We are a union. Now, he also, however, is careful to say, we have this union, but we need to recognize that each state or territory also has the choice to do certain things it needs to do in its own state. So that states should not dictate what other states do. And this is coming about when slavery was becoming an issue. Harrison stated that it wasn't right for one state to dictate, and he suggested that the imposition of anti-slavery elements on one state to the other was not okay. And he said, quote, the attempt of those of one state to control the domestic institutions of another can only result in feelings of distrust and jealousy, violence, and civil war. So already here we're seeing sort of these sentiments and these conflicts in terms, this kind of forbearing civil war looming. And he's recognizing that and saying, we've got sort of a situation that we're going to have to figure out. In terms of understanding that there are things he needs to do as an executive, but there are also limits, Harrison takes a fair amount of time going through this. He acknowledges that he needs to supervise the territories, and he needs to make sure that the citizens in those territories are treated fairly. He also makes sure that his message here mirrors that which he was saying about the guiding principles for his administration. Early in his speech, he shows that he understands he needs to tread lightly with his power because, quote, he realized people came to judge me positively or negatively, unquote. Everybody has an opinion on the president, right? So here he's trying to sort of recognize that. And again, without mentioning Van Buren's name, he continuously suggests that he's going to pull back executive power. He even calls the people, while he is executive, to investigate the executive and keep a watchful eye on the executive. So really putting forth this hardline stance on, we need to be careful here, folks. He ends his speech saying, fellow citizens, being fully invested with that high office to which the partiality of my countrymen has called me, I will now take an affectionate leave of you. His final recognition, showing that he has been given this power by the people, assures the people that he's not going to take their power away. Okay? The power of the people is going to be preserved through him. Now, ironically, although the content of his speech clearly shows that he does not want to take a lot of executive power, taking 2 hours of the people's time and the tone he used may have suggested otherwise, right? So, just as inaugurals were given before Harrison, they'll continue beyond him. And though they take different directions, they're given by different people, you can see that common form as you look through them. and they've become a very lasting and important tradition in our nation. From 1841 to 2009, you can see that it's probably gotten bigger. It's gotten brighter, and you can decide, has it gotten better as you look? And we're going to sort of look at Obama's as we go forward here. And I want to sort of show you that Obama does too have these certain common elements. So in 2009, President Barack Obama delivered his historic speech of 2,395 words. So remember, that's about a third of the length of Harrison's. So he wore a coat, and he wore a hat. He did not wear a hat, but he did not get sick, okay? So perhaps presidents have taken that lesson from Harrison. Like Harrison, Obama fulfilled the components of the inaugural address, but he did it in his own style. And I chose one quote to share with you that I really think encapsulates a lot of the speech. He said, "On this day we gather because we have chosen hope over fear, unity of purpose over conflict and discord. On this day we come to proclaim an end to the petty grievances and false promises, the recriminations and worn-out dogmas that for far too long have strangled our politics. We remain a young nation, but in the words of Scripture, the time has come to set aside childish things. The time has come to reaffirm our enduring spirit, to choose our better history, to carry forward that precious gift, that noble idea passed on from generation to generation, the God-given promise that all are equal, all are free, and all deserve a chance to pursue their full measure of happiness." Here, he unifies the audience by emphasizing unity itself. He says the word several times during his inaugural address. And he emphasizes the communal values, being that second element, of equality, freedom, opportunity, happiness, and Scripture. Those values sound an awful lot like the ones Harrison also celebrated, right? And so here we see these past traditions, these past values being passed on. And that's one of the traditions that we have in this country, that the president who takes over sort of continues these grander ideas or grander narratives. However, Obama did not get into constitutional specifics like Harrison did. He really did not touch on this idea of separation of powers. He did not talk about monarchs. It's a different time. Speeches adapt, they adjust, they become different with different contexts and with different surroundings. He did, however, point to the partisanship that he thought often got in the way of doing government work, right? A lot of his speech was about how we have different ideas, but we need to come together. And it might be best if we don't take the extreme ideas to start the conversation. So there's a passage that really points to that. But in terms of guiding principles, he really talked about how our guiding principles should be moving forward. And that we need to make the choice to move forward together. And finally, he showed that he understood both the requirements of the executive and the limitations of the executive by using the platform to deliver a powerful speech, but he also reminded them, the people, all of you, that the people had a choice. He said, choose and choice. To choose, right? He was not simply just telling them what to believe. He was saying, here, you are part of this. You make a choice. of the word we. He did not say I a lot, which shows that he's sharing this with the people. It's hard to find an I in Obama's address. It's hard to find a we in Harrison's address, which is an interesting comparison to make, especially when Harrison was trying to convey the idea of we. Moreover, Obama did not demand action of the people, right? He recognized that they needed to think as well. They needed to come together and conversate, if you will. So, in a couple months, we'll hear another inaugural address, which shall be quite exciting, I'm guessing. I think we'll sure to be hearing something either historic, right, with the first female presidency, or something different with Trump, who doesn't sometimes do the traditional political speech. We can look at the length of the speech. I'm guessing that no president is going to go for 2 hours again because of all that has been made of the fact that Harrison went for 2 hours. But as you watch it, I hope that this presentation has shown you a couple of more ways to look into it and think about, oh, how are they using those 4 elements? How are they using it in a way that's similar or different than past? And what does that allow them to accomplish, right? So how does it maintain and alter the rhetorical tradition that presidents have established in the past and have carried on for our nation's entire, right, length of its life? So with that, I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to hear comments. We can talk about inaugurals. Yeah.
I was curious how it's different now with Harrison. First, certainly the majority of the nation read the speech.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't see or hear it.
Yeah.
Going to say, even with the presidents now, where it went to hearing it, like it did with Roosevelt, or maybe even to Kennedy, which was the first time people actually saw somebody delivering it,
Mm-hmm.
how that's changed what they say and how they say it.
What people who have watched
No,
it?
what the president is actually conveying.
Yes.
Because of those 3 different elements.
Mm-hmm. It's gotten shorter, right? And I think that's because people watching, it's televised now. People have a shorter attention span now, right? One of my students was like, I wonder if Trump will tweet his inaugural address, right? So I think that's one of the things. The elements have stayed quite the same. So what were the other elements
It's
of your
just,
question?
it went from reading to hearing to seeing.
Right. It's kind of like the television personality, right? I think with reading, and this is one of the reasons Harrison maybe did more of those guiding political principles, you can comprehend it better when you're able to read it. It's still a lot to read, let me tell you. But to say that, the spoken is a really different type of rhetoric for the audience to understand. So the assumption now is more people are going to listen to it. They want to be part of it. They're going to be there. Whereas then, right, you had to read it. So you could go longer, right? It's easier to read. There's more guideposts. When you're speaking, you have to sort of put in more of that repetitive theme, so kind of give them the verbal landmarks to go through.
Do we know the names of anybody who might have helped Harrison write his speech?
Oh, yes. I have this written down because this is...
I thought there might be somebody who became famous later.
Yes. Because it was very interesting. Daniel Webster. I couldn't remember off my head, so yes, we know him, right? He helped edit it. Mm-hmm.
Edit it?
Yes. Yeah, I know, right? Didn't do a very good job if he was editing it down. Yeah. Yeah.
Was practice then that like Van Buren was there as part, like the other one stands by that's leaving or stuff like that? Was he there at the yeah.
That has been the tradition, so my assumption would say yes, right, you're supposed to be there. I can't definitively tell you, right, I didn't read anything about him being there or not being there. So by deduction, I would say yes, but don't take my word for it.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of the one coming up,
Yeah,
whoever wins,
yep,
wow, I mean, what's the other one gonna do?
right, yes, I mean, but the one thing that doesn't happen is unless you have just beat an incumbent, that person's not going to be there. So Trump won't be there by Hillary, and Hillary won't be there by Trump, which is probably a good thing for the unity of our nation at the moment. So yeah, yes.
Now, with Harrison, his stump speeches before, were they also long?
There's not a lot preserved, right? They did a lot of singing, right? That type of campaigning, no. So I wouldn't say there were a lot. This was one of the only formal things that he said that has been preserved.
As an example, in the Lincoln-Douglas debate,
Yes.
Douglas was always longer in speaking than Lincoln. Was there any indication that Harrison was a winded person?
I have not read any that suggests that. So it may be the case, but I've not read it.
I think a partial answer to that question. Back then, it was not considered to be proper for a person to campaign for himself.
Yes.
So they didn't give stump speeches. They
Right.
had, maybe Chachi was out there at the time. But one other thing, Harrison seemed to be pushing the states' rights position, wasn't John Tyler the only ex-president that supported secession in the Civil War?
John Tyler was said to have completely reversed what Harrison was talking about. He kind of did not go the Whig way. He sort of went back to the Democrat-Republican, so.
But he was a supporter of secession, wasn't he, Tyler? Am I wrong?
I am not going to answer that because I do not know the answer. Kai?
But about Tyler, did he rhetorically then, given that his inauguration would have been, much closer to the previous than a standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did he make reference, to Harrison's address?
I'm not that familiar with his address, so I'm not
Sure.
completely sure. Yes. In terms of being long-winded, it was more common for speeches to be more long-winded at that time. So the fact that he gave a long speech, it was generally longer than most then, but it's not as uncommon, it wasn't as uncommon as it is to us now, seeing how long it was, right? It was more accepted for people to go on longer.
At the Gettysburg, the main address, right, went on for 2 hours, and then Lincoln
Right,
got
right,
up
right,
and
right.
he added a few pithy comments,
Yes.
So some of the previous inaugural speeches around that time, I knew they weren't as long as Harrison's, but they were longer than the speeches nowadays, I take it.
Some of them were, yes. Taft's was about twice as long, so if you look, but I wouldn't make that complete claim, because if you look, right, Washington gave the shortest, his second inaugural was the shortest that there was. So a little bit longer, right? The more modern ones tend to be shorter, and it might suggest something about our ability to listen, right? and sit down and not be distracted, right? So I think that's an interesting thing to think about.
So in other words, they'll even get shorter.
I don't know. I wouldn't think they would get that much shorter, because this is really a time for the president-elect to get out there and kind of give their presence and sort of a theme to their presidency. So I wouldn't expect them to get too much shorter.
Can you go back and show the picture of the both inaugurations or the?
Yeah.
Okay, now, is that two, is one, and then the top one is what? Is that the Obama's is the top one?
Oh, this is just
One picture.
So
I thought you were dividing.
all of these people.
This is when? Obama's?
2009, his
Okay.
first, yes.
What was the constitution of the people listening there, and were they all standing? That's another thing you have to be concerned. And did everybody kind of leave, there were just 5 or 6 people at the very end? What was the
was the environment?
During Harrison's.
Yes.
I mean, it was still celebratory, right? The inaugurals were still like a day of celebration. Like for his, there were parades and military bands and raccoons in cages being, you know, so it was still an event that people stayed for, right? And, you know, it was happy. It wasn't this big, right? But it still brought in people. It was harder to travel then, so you're not getting people going. Like now, this is a huge event. Everybody wants to be there. They're buying plane tickets. You know, schools are bringing field trips here. So it was still a big thing, but the logistics of the time, the technology of the time, the transport of the time did not allow as many people to go. But it was still something people wanted to be at. It was still a cultural event that people wanted to be a part of.
There was no speakers involved. They had, whoever could listen, just listen to the man's voice, right?
Yes, yes.
So I'm thinking that it's, you know, plus the length of it, I could see maybe, you know, not very many people left there.
Making it, yeah.
Wasn't this at a different time of year as well? Harrison's inaugural was in the spring maybe, or?
Yep, so it was March 11th, and it's usually, it's January 20th now.
How has the role of speechwriters changed then and now?
Well, people differ on the idea of how much help people got at these times, but it also isn't as well known. So I don't think he drafted this entirely by himself, but I definitely don't think he got as much help as Obama did, right? And also, sometimes presidents don't want to say they got as much help as they did, right? They want to show that they've been involved, and it really differs between president to president, even in the modern age, right? Like Bill Clinton really liked to write his own speeches and be very, very involved in them. George W. Bush, not as much, right? So it depends on who you are, even in the modern age. I would say they had help, right? Daniel Webster helped. It's not talked about as much in terms of historically, but it was done.
In light of the great rhetoric that does exist in these addresses, do you have an opinion as to who may have reached the highest level of attainment in what they promised, or let's say what their aims and objectives were during their term of office?
So, who had the best rhetoric, or who actually fulfilled the promises of their rhetoric?
Who had the highest degree of fulfillment?
Who gave us the highest degree of false hope? Ooh, that's a dangerous question.
Fulfillment. Of fulfillment.
Of fulfillment. Ooh. Do you have an opinion? This is kind of political territory. See, I teach my students very much to hold people accountable for what they say, right? I think that there are a lot of things that are promised that don't come into fruition. I don't have a good answer for you. I did my dissertation on Ronald Reagan, and I did find that his rhetoric perhaps overpromised, right? In terms of, we might think of him as somebody that didn't raise taxes. He did raise taxes a lot, right? So like he had this ability to really put forth this message that sometimes was not with sort of the reality of policy that occurred during his administration. But I think you can say that to an extent about all presidents.
Degrees.
I mean, and so I might say Lincoln to you because he accomplished a lot and he was a little bit more humble about the speeching. He didn't really like talking that much. He was great at it, but there was a hesitancy in him in terms of like not wanting to overpromise. Like,
well, FDR had many achievements, but he had many opportunities to talk about them too.
yes, yeah. I think that's a really interesting question, and I think we all probably have different answers to that too, right?
But do you not think it depends on the context of the times as to how much they were able to fulfill all of their promises? promises or their
Oh.
objectives.
Yes.
And that had to do with the Congress that they worked with
Yes.
as much as anything.
Yes,
I mean, if you were a
absolutely.
president in time of war, your record could look maybe better because of all of those challenges.
Yes, I mean,
So I don't think you can really say any one president with his inaugural, you can judge him solely on that because
Right.
there are too many other countervailing situations.
yes, you're absolutely right. And that's one of the things you'll see in political ads a lot, like this person didn't do anything while they were in office, right? And then I always say, well, okay, let's look into why they didn't. Like what was happening legislation-wise? What did they try to and they just couldn't because the other house had a majority? So it's very complicated too.
Right, and all of the external circumstances
Yes.
that can change your direction of your inaugural.
Yes.
I'm a-
Do it.
Yes. Yes.
I'm about to give the last question warning, this is not it, but to remind you that we do have coffee and treats in the anteroom here. But on that subject, I think what Jim said is very important. It might almost be interesting to look at the unfulfilled promises, because Kennedy said we'd get a human on the moon, and it fell to his successors because he was dead, right? But the nation grabbed that, and we did it. Whereas, although Lincoln did accomplish what he said he was going to do in his first inaugural, in his second, none of his successors have bound up the nation's wounds. And would we ever at some time as a nation decide, well, let's take that up and finish the job? That said, we've got time for one more question, and then we're going to retire for coffee and cookies.
I just want to make a comment on the campaign song. Seems like that is dead now. But was Kennedy's campaign song the last campaign song? Does anybody remember if there were any other campaign songs after Kennedy? I don't think there were.
Well, they adopt pop songs now.
Yeah.
So, if you remember, there was I'm not enough of a pop person, that Obama did one,
Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then I noticed that for about 6 or maybe even a dozen appearances in a row, at the end of Mr. Trump's appearances, they would play the Rolling Stones' You Can't Always Get What You Want. Which I thought, did anyone really think about the selection of that song? But then they were told to stop using it.
Right. Yes, so they're very, campaign songs are often chosen by the candidates, and then, like I said, the people who wrote them sometimes say, please do not use that again. Can I play this one really quick? Sure. So this is a modern thing.
It was a creed written into the founding documents. They declared the destiny of the nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists, and it blazed the trails towards freedom. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. It was not. It was brought by everyone. It went down to the distant shore of the flying earth. It swept westward. Together, unforgiving road. Oh, we can. Yes, we can. It was the call of workers to organize. Women reached into the balance. President chose the moon as our new frontier. And the king used it to the mountaintop.
So this is him playing upon like popular artists of the time and sort of having his voice and his words merge with theirs, creating this idea that, right, he's one of the people, that idea we talked about a little bit during this conversation, right? Showing the communal sort of value of unity that he really is during his campaigns and his inaugural. So, yeah, these rhetorical tactics and song, you might have been talking about too, if you remember the commercial, be like I, be like I, be like I, right? So there's that, and those kind of like catchy songs, but the catchy songs, I feel like, are used less now, right? Those are used maybe more for Cheetos or cereal, and maybe candidates don't want to be associated with like a consumer product.
Frank Sinatra did one for Jack Kennedy.
Oh, yeah?
You know, it was fairly catchy, but probably the most famous one is Happy Days Are Here Again.
Yeah.
You know, with FDR, and that has become the anthem of the Democratic Party, you know, it's still played.
Well, friends, would you join me in thanking Dr. Meg Kunde?